Hey folks, I want to give a big shout out to everybody who is supporting the Patreon because what they're really doing is they're supporting accessibility when it comes to this podcast. The money that comes from that is used in part to provide transcriptions for every episode so that anybody who would rather read the interviews for whatever reasons is able to do so, and it allows these great conversations to reach a wider audience and those who otherwise might be unable to get the benefits of that material. So a big thank you. And of course, there's also a bonus in it for them, which is they get access to all sorts of great private material that only shows up in that space, including, related to this episode, our feminist playlist of music that has inspired the Stacking Skulls and Brianna Saucy over the years. So all of that can be found over at patreon.com/thehermitslamp, or follow the links in the show notes. As they say, every dollar helps, and it all goes towards something that I feel is deep and important. Welcome everybody to another installment of the Hermit's Lamp podcast. I am here today with Peter Jenx. And for those who don't know Peter Jenx, he is the author of a massive and intriguing tome called Thai Occult. And it's really interesting to meet with somebody and talk with people who are involved in non-Western cultures and other ways of practicing magic that don't kind of come out of, say the Golden Dawn or Wicca or these other things, which are all lovely. But I think it's really interesting to get a dive into, other kinds of worldviews and magic and all of those things. So really that's why, when Peter and I connected, I thought it'd be a great fit for being on the show. But for those who don't know you, Peter, who are you?
Well, I'm a aging Englishman sat in Shanghai at the moment. Been living in Thailand since 2002, but first visited here in 1991, which is kind of before its main economic explosion and everything else. And come from a musical background, working in music in Manchester, worked a lot with gigs, run rather interesting nightclubs in Manchester, and also been a practitioner of Tai Chi for like 20 years. So I think everything's always pulled me east, which is why really on the first visit, I kind of knew I'd end up living here. It fits.
It's interesting how that works, right? I was talking with somebody yesterday about I come from a Scottish background, even though I was born and raised in Toronto, and they're like, oh, well, have you been to Scotland? I'm like, no, I haven't. I mean, I'm curious, but I find I'm much more drawn to the East, and I spent a bit of time in Thailand and a chunk of time in India, and, I was in China last year. And every time I return to the East, I always have this sense of ease that emerges that's quite different than what I experience living in Toronto. It's like there are these places and cultures that are suited to our nature in ways that we might not even be able to explain or understand.
Well, I think it's one. I think at first when we come here, we are given space, and it's a space that we're not necessarily given in the West. Also, what I experienced when I first came here was a realization that what I'd always felt regarding nature and regarding what I perceive as magic in the West was correct. Because here it is expressed in a much deeper way than it is in England in particular. I don't know. And I think we need the strangeness to grow. Yeah, and sometimes part of any growth, as far as I'm concerned, is the process of change. And if you go to an alien culture, you are constantly challenged to change. And that can be astonishingly refreshing for us.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And also that idea, there are other ways of looking at the world and nature. I mean, the word animism has been being kicked around a lot and sort of gained a lot of ground as sort of a word for some of the kind of worldview that we might be talking about. And I think that's both part of it. For me, going there, going to other places, and my involvement in and initiation in Afro-Cuban Lukumí, there is this sort of worldview at play where plants are alive and have energies and consciousness, and there's this interconnectedness between everything that isn't really common even amongst magical practitioners, at least in my experience kind of growing up.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those. The funny thing is, okay, I had to isolate myself to do this book. I have not been able to read other magical books at all. Otherwise, it would have kind of diluted or influenced what I was going to do. The whole time I've spent here has been really a time to learn how not to think and influence what is around you. And if you do that, you gain the natural focus that comes with the occult practices of this land. And that allows the nature to come through. But I always perceived this as just the Thai Occult. Everybody else calls it Thai animism. So I'm just getting used to the fact that it is probably animism. But everybody, all the people I deal with, all refer to it as an occult practice. But as an animist practice, it dates back thousands of years, and it is uninterrupted. Now, that's quite rare in the world, as far as I know. I haven't studied anything else in depth deliberately. And because of that, the depth of what I've been able to write about and the depth of understanding that is available is really off the planet, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a difference between living practices that date way back. With the Afro-Cuban Lukumí stuff and Orisha tradition, it's one of those things where when we start talking about divination in those systems, often people are quite astounded, and I know I was really astounded at the kinds of things that are included in the wisdom and specificity and all of these kinds of things. And it's, in the end, the explanation is simple. You've had a lot of very deep, intelligent, mystical people pondering the human condition and connecting to the spirit world for thousands of years and passing on that information and allowing it to accumulate. And it provides such a deep insight into human nature and human problems, because although the nature of the problems changes with modernity and so on, the nature of being human really doesn't, I don't think.
Well, that actually depends on the culture, though, because if you look at the Thai system, the things that it offers are the things that people of this region require.
Right.
So, this has been a very dangerous region over the thousands of years. They've been lucky enough to have the influence of Buddhism, which always overrides ancient animist practices. So they can remain who they are while attaining a higher spirituality, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And really, because of the rough nature of the living in the wilds and the constant wars in the region, most of the things that they have worked out to offer and create for their devotees are related to protection in many forms: impenetrable skin, invincibility, ways to bounce back black magic, ways to change your fate, ways to attract people, ways to become popular, ways to gain good fortune. So it's all about, but at the core of it all, it's actually all about the person as well, because they're being given an advantage that they've got to work with. So it's not just abracadabra, like, wham, okay, now you're popular. They might give you the attributes of being popular, but if you're a bit of a twat, it's not going to work.
Right.
So everything that they create is all about the development of the person themselves being given an advantage that they have to grow into,
Mm-hmm.
which is typical of what we were talking about earlier, whereby the constant process of change is also can be, we go backwards sometimes, can be the process to either becoming a better person or more magical or however you want to see it. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And throughout the thousands of years that they've developed it here, they've discovered what is actually supernatural in nature. And they
Mm-hmm.
have their own versions of it. Which, how the hell they discover that, I don't know. But, special people discover special things. They discover what human products they can use for rather powerful spells. They discover all the plants
Mm-hmm.
independently, often,
Mm-hmm.
of other cultures. So I posted a picture of a particular tree that produces a particular wood that the Thais use in many magical amulets called Mudam. And in their legends, it's the tree that you climb to get out of hell because it's impossible to climb because of huge spikes on the
Mm.
trunk. And it was a fantastic discussion ensued because it was also a magical wood in pretty much every other system that I was in contact with at that time through the Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
And the incredulity of that between everybody was really rather wonderful.
Hmm.
It kind of just pulled everybody together.
Well, and
And
to me, that's animism, right? That's the
yes,
tree telling you what it wants to do, right? And
yep.
telling
You
everybody
see,
like the same thing. It's like, hey, I can help you with this thing, if you work with me, and that's what's really profound about these things, I think.
yes, very much so. It's and the more kind of I've learned about things, we were discussing. I put a post in earlier about lightning and how lightning can make things magical.
Mm-hmm.
And I was chatting with a particularly learned Ajahn from a very old lineage called Ajahn Sura, Ajahn Tiger, with the help of my partner, of course. And he was telling me really that if a lightning strikes a tree, its use depends on the effect of the lightning on the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Like if it blows off the bark in the middle, that area is used for the handles of magical knives.
Mm.
If it strikes another area of the tree, it's used for something else. So, depending even on how a supernatural occurrence like a lightning strike hits something, it can produce all sorts of different results. And at the time we were having this chat, it was really rather mind blowing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That people have spent generations upon generations studying the effects of these supernatural occurrences.
Yeah. Well, and I think that it's so foreign to people living in cities, but I mean, when you start spending time in nature and start
Mm.
consistently spending time in nature, it really can start to speak to you after a while, right? I
Yes, of
spent
course.
there was a site where we used to go and do ceremonies every month for almost 2 years, and kind of towards the end of that time, I did a 10-day retreat by myself where I just hung out in the woods and fasted and did my own rituals and stuff like that.
Mm.
And the amount of things that I learned from that land and from the plants and the kinds of things that got revealed to me, and even just like sort of unexpected beautiful things. There's this cherry tree, and I knew it was cherry tree. We'd seen the flowers; it was beautiful, and so on. But the thing that was amazing, because I was there all day, every day for that period of time, when I was there, the sap was coming out, and so there
Mm-hmm.
were these little reddish, golden, amber blobs on the tree from the sap emerging,
Yeah.
and the tree was in the west from where I usually was, and when I looked up towards sunset, all of those were glowing like a stained glass window, right?
Wonderful.
And
Yeah.
so there are these moments of profound beauty and profound transference of information, and where those plants can speak to you. And if you're around them all the time, then and you're paying attention, then you get to notice them, right?
Well,
But
it's the attention that's the thing, and
yeah,
this is why I think in the modern world, governments are terrified of nature because it pulls people away from what they want to do,
yeah,
the people to do, you know, to be a good little drone and all the other sayings that we can come out with rather pithily.
yeah,
But you know, it's and even the medical community is now turning around and saying, look, you know, to fight depression, just go and walk in the hills, go and sit in the forest.
for
You know,
sure.
but this kind of, you know, I'm lucky enough to be of an age where it was more of a natural world at the time, and this is, you know, it makes me kind of put my head in my hands that people are having to be reminded to do that. You know, and the beauty that is available and the wealth that is available is astonishing. Since we moved to Chiang Mai, me and my partner have been round looking at some of the interesting spiritual caves in this region. And, you know, if we have time when people visit, I might take them to one or two. But there's one that I've already decided, I think there's only one or two people I'll take to that particular one. It's too wild. And if if we spend the time like you have to be able to still the mind
Yeah,
and treat ourselves to a little bit of solitude, we start to see these things, you know,
yeah.
and they become more special.
Well, and I also think that we really need to understand and respect, you know, like if we're gonna go into the real wilderness, you know, or real spots in nature, you know, it's something quite different, right? You know,
Yes.
again in my tradition, the real woods, you know, like not just like a couple plants around your yard or the park, but the actual forest is a place that's somewhat feared by practitioners. Not in a that sounds wrong. It's a place that's deeply respected because it's known to
That's
be a
yeah,
place of power, and because
yeah.
it's a place of power, it's also a place of danger. You know, and so you make offerings to make sure that you're protected while you're there. You make offerings maybe when you leave to make sure that nothing you didn't want comes with you. You
Yeah.
know, you make, if you're going to take anything, then you make offerings to the plants that you're going to take from. You know, and you know, it's so rare for a lot of us to have contact with that deep wilderness. You know, it's something completely foreign, and it's astounding, right?
Well, it's yeah. Usually, at least once or twice a month, I end up going off with an ajahn, often to graveyards for graveyard ceremonies,
Yeah.
which I'm starting to document more fully. And you know, watching the ajahn go into, I always call it ajahn world.
Yeah. And
While
by
they're
what's a good translation for a John? Is
teacher,
practitioner, teacher? Yeah.
but ajahn is a higher teacher, yeah, but
Okay.
it's more than that. Yeah, it's an occultist, really.
Yeah.
Um, and watching them deal with what is there and become open to what is there. And you know, I asked Ajahn Su, and I've also asked Ajahn Apichai. You know, often they go there to choose a ghost to do a particular task, and to which Ajahn Apichai would, you know, often say, "Well, we've come to this graveyard because it's a graveyard where there are many soldiers and police."
Right.
So he said he normally tries to choose a good-natured ghost, so they don't come home with you, even though he has strong protection.
Yeah.
And the deal is made, you know, to reward the spirit when the job is done. And he knows, he can tell within 5% really how effective that particular spirit's going to be. And sometimes he will go back and repeat or just say, no, it's worked. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go with Ajahn Suh, and the same questions will be, Ajahn likes to choose what are called Pitai Hong ghosts, which are the ghosts of people who died violently before their time. And again, he said some of them are really quite lovely. And, we were standing just in the graveyard doing a love ritual, pulling a separated couple back together. And he slaps on the side of the cremation pit. It's just two walls to focus the heat in to be able to burn the body fully in the open, in a bit of wood. And he's calling ghosts, and it was the time of year when leaves are on the floor. The leaves shed up here, some trees, and you could hear something walking towards us, from a particular direction. So he called that ghost over and came to a deal. And they said, "Oh, it's been successful." They said, "And I'll come back in a few days and bring the offering that I promised, and I will donate merit." And merit is something we gain. It's a Thai Buddhist principle where we gain merit through good deeds, helping people. A basic form of it would be giving to charity. And, these Pitai Hong ghosts need to collect merit to get out of hell, to eventually try and rise towards rebirth. And Ajahn Suh is very careful about the ghosts he chooses. He never forces them. He requests. He's very gentle. Otherwise, they can hurt you. Yeah. And then when we get back, both of the Ajahns will always bless water, splash on feet, hands, top of head, back of neck, just to make sure nothing has been clingy. So I mean, they all follow similar patterns where, and if anything's taken, you request it to be taken. If you're going to work with anything, you ask its permission. And it's extremely similar all around the world, except for the cultural differences. Yeah. And the influence is like in this region of Buddhism has been a particular influence.
So I have so many questions. I guess one of my questions, though, coming out of what you just talked about, you mentioned somewhere along the way changing your fate, right? And I'm really curious about the idea of fate as it exists in this practice. Can you?
Wow. Okay.
Can you just answer that small question for us? Tell us what that's like.
What the idea of fate is. I don't study Horosat, which is Thai astrology. Okay, but what I would say is that I think the Thai occult responds to people's states of mind. Yeah, and help to get people out of a state of mind to improve themselves again, as well as realigning their fate. There's a dual motion going on here. Where we are given a kata, we have to make offerings, we have to take care of something, we have to structure our lives around it, we have to take the 5 precepts, which are the basic things: don't kill anybody, stop shagging around, don't lie, etc., etc. And often, besides the help of something like Rahu, which the Thai Rahu is not the same as the Indian one, but we praise it in a different way, which really annoys the Indians.
Right.
And we gain his help. Now, if to do that, we have to order our lives around it. So I think it's a dual road of choosing a better path, choosing the help of somebody who is smart enough and spiritual enough to help you, and then structuring your life in a different way. The Rahu is considered to raise your general level of good fortune.
And Rahu is what exactly?
Rahu is the god that eats the sun or the moon from Indian mythology. Is the god of eclipses. But in India, they do not praise him. They're trying to get rid of him.
Yep.
And they think it's horrific that Thai people praise Rahu. But usually they often consider that a period of very bad fortune is sometimes Rahu coming into somebody's lives and influencing it without being asked to come in. So by praising him, you're going to offer your foods, the correct foods, which always have to be black, in either numbers of 7, 9, or 15, depending on the ajahn, different black foods. Usually on the 4 quarters of the moon, with the full moon being the most important. Normally it's advised to wear the Rahu on the full moon, in which case he kind of feels like he's bouncing around on your chest like going to a disco. It's extremely rewarding. Many ajahns swear by Rahu, but he takes a lot of work.
Right.
So I think it's a dual, being very honest about this, I think it's a dual combination whereby we get our shit together and then the help offered by the Rahu, offered by the ajahn, will start to improve the life.
And when we're talking about fate here, are we talking about, I mean, we can be a little simplistic to maybe forward the conversation. Are we talking about it as a sense of karma, like consequences for our actions, this life, other lives, or whatever? Are we talking about like a destiny or a thing that we're sort of came intact from somewhere, or that we need to try and achieve maybe in our life?
Well, we always have influence. I think there's 3 forms of influence on the brain. Okay, there's 3 forms of influence. We consider to be 3 forms of influence from life. One is an astrological influence. Astrology influences the person without any doubt at all. Yeah. The second one in Thai is the influence of ghosts.
Okay.
Yeah, and spirits directing your life without you knowing about it.
Yeah.
And the third one is the influence of the mind and all the silly things that the mind does can be destructive. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you, everybody goes through a period of bad fortune, but they can have very, very different reasons. Sometimes, even in the Thai practices, we can have a real crash of fortunes. But I always just see it as it's just a part of life, man. It can't be good all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a readjustment of yourself and of the way you deal with yourself. I don't like to involve things like karma. I'm very practical in that respect.
Yeah.
It's about living an open and happy life, and sometimes shit goes wrong.
Yeah.
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 Through bereavement, through everything else.
Sorry, go ahead.
Through bereavement and through everything else. But that period, then we have to kind of realign ourselves. I think focusing on what has actually caused the problem is one of the things that we need to get away from and just deal with the fact that we're in the shit.
Yeah.
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 So that also immediately stops all the stuff that goes around in the brain, or at least helps with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. In the Lukumí divination, we have a kind of negativity which we call otanawa, which means roughly means that which you brought with you from heaven, and it's this yeah, this is a thing that's was you can't do anything about. Maybe it's part of your destiny. Maybe it's just come to a place where the various forces in your life make this inevitable, but now you need to just appease it, ease it, support yourself, and get through it. And then, but there's no making it go away, right? Like, there's no perfect road, right? Where we never
Well, there
see
can't
these
be.
things.
Otherwise, we get so spoiled that the smallest pebble on the road would become an absolute nightmare if it got into our shoe. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's, we need it. We need these things to happen in life, in my opinion. Otherwise, we don't have any understanding of what life is or can be about.
And I also think it's really interesting that the idea of easing the mind by stopping asking why and looking to explain it. I think that's a place where a lot of people, I read cards for people. And, there are certainly folks who come in for card readings who are just like, but why? Why did this happen? Why did this happen? It's like, at a certain point, what does it matter? How about you do this to make it better? And
Yeah.
it's that practicality that I think is sometimes very unsatisfying to people in certain situations.
Well, it's a Western thing. Our minds are way too busy.
Mm-hmm.
I live, one of the core elements of Thai culture is samadhi, which is focus that is gained through Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? It is an open and clear focus whereby we're trying to separate ourselves from the mind. So you end up in a position where you can watch your mind being a bastard.
Yeah.
Yeah? Or being a bit balmy one day. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, when you actually, but I always ask people, what is watching the mind?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in my opinion, what you are doing and what you are going to learn to do is to find out who you are, which is not often what your mind is.
For sure.
Even in our culture, we have sayings like, "What does your stomach tell you?"
Mm-hmm.
It's not sayings what does your mind tell you. They will say, "What do you think?" Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the aims is to eventually secure yourselves. And then when you get to that point, you can start to see or feel astrological influences.
Mm-hmm.
You can have an idea about whether you're being influenced by something else. And you can you can watch your mind and attempt to try and calm it down so it doesn't cause as much trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and all these are core practices within Buddhism and Eastern philosophies.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that ability to step back from what's going on in your head and basically be like, oh, look at that. My brain is doing this thing in the same way that my stomach might be doing another thing, and my knee might be acting up or whatever. It's like I'm not any of those things, right?
Yeah.
But sort of tuning down the emotions and the mind to kind of a place of somewhat lesser value or more specific value than the sort of overriding quality that we often associate with them. That's not easy, right? That's for a lot of people, especially
But
Western people.
if you ever visit, one of the wonderful things to do is to go and see someone like a dancer
Mm-hmm.
who was a monk for 18 years. So this guy's got focus.
Yeah.
And recently we went along with somebody who wanted a head tattoo.
Okay.
A head yan for metta, for loving kindness.
Mm-hmm.
The highest of the high Buddhist style tattoos.
Yeah.
Head tattoos hurt.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And this is done with a gun. It's not, a dancer can only use a gun because he's got an arm that won't do as it's told.
Mm-hmm.
And the lad doing it had great difficulty controlling the screaming.
Mm-hmm.
And I was helping out. Being a bit of an assistant. And I was watching Ajahn, and he just went into his quiet place and not thought. With no thinking, he was just chanting kata while he was doing the inside, while performing this tattoo, which took way longer than the recipient really wanted it to. And he pretty much screamed all the way through. So when we left, and then the worst thing was that if you have a tattoo with a dancer, he will then give you his yan crew, which is he gives to everybody he gives tattoos to, and it's a line of script going along the thumb line at the bottom of the palm, and man, it's painful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And as soon as he said to me in Thai, "Oh, just hold his hand," I thought, "Oh my God, he's really going to scream now."
Yeah.
He did. He really let go.
Yeah.
And then when we left Ajahn, after about 10 minutes, the guy just lit up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he got the sun inside his face, and he actually said, "Wow, now I know why I've had it done. I wasn't sure for the last half an hour."
Yeah.
And he looked amazing,
Mm-hmm.
and we're actually leaving. But then once we left, Ajahns neighbours from across the road came over to see him to make sure everything was okay.
Right.
And Ajahn is such a sweet man. He kept stopping and going, "Su su," which means, you have to fight a little bit, but doing it in such a cute way. It was like an anime,
Yeah.
And watching him not be drawn into somebody else's pain, not be influenced by somebody who was having difficulty, and retaining his own presence was a lesson in itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was quite astonishing. It was an amazing 30 minutes.
It's such a, I mean, I hear in that story what I would call a profound sense of compassion that doesn't
Yes.
match what we normally, people might go to as a sense of compassion, which is a sense of that deeper purpose of what's at hand, a loving acknowledgement of the struggle, and
Yeah.
a commitment to the outcome that was what was meant to be, like what was agreed to, as
Yes.
opposed to an avoidance of a kind of suffering for that person, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And also, when he finished the tattoo, Ajahn told him, instead of keeping the 5 precepts, he only has to keep 1. He said, but you keep this precept. And when he told him the 1, I'm not going to say which one it is. I'm not going to divulge anything about what he said. But he said, how does he choose the most difficult one he could possibly choose for me? I said, oh, he always does that.
Of course.
I said, otherwise, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
And the guy just fell around laughing. He said, how does he know? I said, well, he's an Ajahn, my friend.
Yeah.
He probably knew as soon as you walked in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it was, again, one of those comical moments when, we realize how much we have to grow and the situation we are in. But the levels of metta, loving kindness, and the beauty of what they are trying to do is just breathtaking.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess let me ask this question, and I imagine there might be a few different answers to it. But how does a person become an Ajahn?
The usual route. Okay, there's from what I can see at the moment, and this is going to change over time as the more time I spend with them. But basically, everybody starts off as being some sort of devotee, using their amulets, learning the kata, becoming kind of known as somebody who makes an effort towards their spiritual practices. They might go off and do a few weeks or a month or even 3 months as a monk, which is all set up within the community. And most Thai men will be a monk at some point in their life for a short period of time. And then they may start helping the Ajahn with rituals and helping the people who visit the samnak, which is the place of work. It's like his spiritual shop. It's like his temple.
Yeah.
Then the studying begins. Now, the studying, we discovered, has actually got levels. And each level, it's a bit like going and getting different degrees. Each level has got what is called the kankru associated with it. And the kankru is a construction of various objects, like sometimes swords, sometimes flags. They're always quite different. A lot of betel nuts, flowers. It depends on the lineage of the Ajahn that's giving it. And there are various levels of the kankru depending on what you study. So the earlier levels tend to be directed towards satyang, the Thai traditional tattooing, after which you tend to learn about sane magic, which is the magic for attraction. Eventually, I'm trying to remember the levels, it's something like the 8, 12, 27, but it ends up at 108. There's about 8 different levels of the kankru. And at each level, you attain a certain understanding. But the kankru is actually considered to be alive. It's considered to have life, and it helps you, teach you, and it can also knock you back if you're not studying enough or being erudite enough or trying enough or just getting it wrong. Yeah.
Right.
So it's way like everything in this system. The book kind of introduces the subject of the Cancru, but the Cancru in itself could probably be a book on its own.
Mm-hmm.
Ajahn Suh holds the Cancru 108, which is the full Wicca, which comes from a similar root word as Wiccan, by the way. The Wicca is the knowledge of a very famous monk called Krubadu Dev, still alive, but he's bedridden at 105. And his Wicca collection, his book collection, is really quite something. It's off the planet, and his knowledge to go along with it. When he was a monk, he had the Cancru 227, which only monks can have. And then you go back to the 108 when you stop being a monk. Okay. So, often you're going to see in Ajahn Suh's Samnak, there's one Cancru, and it's 108, everything. And there are a certain colour to show that his teacher is still alive, and they change the colour when he dies. In other Samnaks you go, and they'll have like 5 or 6 Cancru for different subjects from different Ajahns. Yeah, so you have some that stick to a certain lineage, and some that go around collecting different Wicca to almost like create their own lineage, to start their own path,
right?
Which then they can help other people along as well. It involves learning at least 3 scripts. It involves learning an enormous amount of kata, understanding the kata, and it involves practices such as various meditational practices, like the 32 parts of the body practice, for which you need a teacher, but there's a brief outline in the book of it, whereby we get to know our physical body by traveling around it. Yeah? And it's split into 32 parts. There is also various meditational practices towards putting 4 elements within the body. But all these kind of roll along through the different levels of study.
And so is the title conferred by the teacher then at some point? Is that the...
The teacher decides when you move to the next level. To become an Ajahn, you can say, I could now turn around and say, I'm Ajahn. I'm an Ajahn. But I'd be a bit of an idiot to do so, because it's really obvious that I'm not.
Right.
Yeah?
Yeah.
In the same way as mastership in martial arts. Yeah. There's always a number of pillocks who call themselves a master, and they have to go through the very painful process of being beaten up by an 8-year-old at some point. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So, similar. You prove yourself by being good at your job.
That's interesting. I'm also really fascinated by, we were talking about nature earlier. Do the Ajahns, are there any living, do they practice in Bangkok, in the center of town? Are they out in the woods?
They do.
Yeah?
No, yes, they do. There are some remarkable magicians in Bangkok. Normally they will deal with the things that people who live in the metropolis need. They'll help them with promotion at work. They'll help them find a lover, and be more attractive. There's one Ajahn called Ajahn Weerated, who's now very famous. He's the first photograph in the book, and he's got very rich clientele that he does spiritual work for, whatever that may entail. Yeah, some of it will be aggressive, some of it will be protective, some of it, because in Thailand, basically, it's really the rich and the poor that use magic. Right. Not necessarily the middle classes.
Yeah.
And there's also people like Ajahn Samat, who is one of the most remarkable Sakyana Ajahns I've ever met. Man, he has it. He has it. Yeah. And for me, he's the best Sakyana Ajahn in Bangkok, but he's difficult to see. He has a mostly Thai clientele. His work is not beautiful. It's very old style. It's very ancient Wicca. But man, he has it. Woo. So all these things are available for people who need it. Finding the very traditional Thai ones will only be done by the Thai people, but then there are other ones who become famous outside the country as well.
So let me ask you this question then. So where does morality fit in these kinds of practices?
In what respect?
So if someone's coming to have work done to bring a relationship back together,
Yeah.
is that seen as both people should be there and consent? Is it seen as one person who wants this to happen can do the work and that could work? We talk about defense and aggression and these other kinds of things. Is there a morality in there, or is that sort of purely a Western question and not even relevant?
There's a morality in everything in life. It just depends on your personal standpoint. Many ajahns nowadays, a lot of the really heavy stuff has gone back in the cupboard because it's not needed anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So, but like say Ajahn Kao, who's a particularly lovely ajahn who I get along very well with in towards Doi Saket, the mountains to the east. He only pulls lovers back together who were already married, and they have to prove it to him. Yeah, he will ask them for impossible things to get. If they can, the skin off the bottom of his foot or her foot, depending on which partner wants the other partner to come back.
Right.
And he will help them get back together because that is an act of metta. He is helping keep a couple together. At the same time, he will basically attempt to get the person who is bringing the paying for the ritual to understand that all the ritual does is bring them back. It's not going to fix your relationship problems. So if you turn around and be angry, it's not going to keep them there. This is not making a slave out of somebody.
Right.
Yeah. So there isn't really anything aggressive within that. I mean, really, people often ask the question, what is black magic in Thailand? Yes, there might be. You get a different answer from everybody.
Sure.
But when they ask the same Ajahn always said, well, attraction. He said, I might use part of somebody's skull for attraction. Yeah, Sane, we call it. He said, but it's just Sane magic. It's not black magic. He said, you're just attracting somebody. Where's the harm in that? You're not kind of turning them into a slave. You're just attracting them.
Right. Yeah, the work isn't.
Whereas other people.
The work isn't geared towards removing people's free will. The work is geared towards providing opportunity.
And
that opportunity, especially sort of based on what you said in the earlier part of the conversation too, that opportunity is both access to the opportunity of that thing and also the opportunity to grow as a person to embody that thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but other people think that just the use of any human materials is black magic in itself.
Sure.
Which I don't consider it to be. There's all sorts of. I will not get into the Thai thoughts about death because everybody does. They're not bothered. It's just part of life.
Sure. Yeah.
Generally, some ajahns think that anything with human materials is black magic. Some ajahns only think that anything that is forceful is black magic. Anything that is cursing is black magic. And they really try not to do it nowadays. They will do something called a com ritual, which is a ritual, it's like a controlling ritual that you do in a graveyard. And it's to rebalance some sort of relationship, like work relationship, your boss is being a bit of a bastard to you, etc. You'll bring a com ritual just to slap him a little bit, slap him down for a few months, let the relationship become better between you. And then it wears off. And they are extremely effective, these. But then, you get people coming forward wanting people hurt or dead or forced into bankruptcy or something serious.
Yep.
And to be honest, nowadays, yes, it can be done, but most Ajahns will say no.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There's some very knowledgeable people about cursing in this city.
Yeah.
Terrifyingly knowledgeable. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But they just choose not to do it unless it's for the right reason.
Yeah.
Because they're forcing something. They're bringing something difficult to themselves at the same time. And everybody nowadays is now trying to strike the correct balance.
Mm-hmm. And do you see that shift as coming out of a shift in cultural values, or is it a shift in the difference in the quality of life now versus in the past?
It's both.
Yeah.
The government's also 10 or 15 years ago, they started clamping down. They started stopping people who had died violently being buried. Yeah, originally, only anybody who died a difficult death, which basically reflects like as a really bad karma, was buried. Everybody else was burned.
Right.
Yeah. So these ground, and they're exactly the people that the Ajahns want to use the products from.
Sure.
Yeah. And they basically stopped doing that 10 to 15 years ago. So slowly but surely that source is being exhausted. Thailand is becoming a very developed country. Access to the human materials is becoming extremely difficult. And, it's not as wild here as it used to be. People need less protection in many ways, more metta, more sene. Because now, the times have changed. Gone are the days where they could just chop, a corpse's head off and leave a watermelon in its place.
Right.
Now they believe that a better protection is to have so much metta that somebody doesn't want to hurt you anyway. Is to be such a lovely person that attracts other people. It makes you difficult to attack. So as cultures develop, the way they use their magical knowledge develops, which is actually the sign of any living form of magic, isn't it?
Well, it reminds me of martial arts practice, right? A lot of people start off in, something a little harder, like, karate or whatever. And, they want to fight and use their muscles and whatever. And as you, hopefully as you age and get a little wiser, you move to something more circular and more soft. And, not that you can't, throw that punch if you need to, but it's often more like, oh, I can just redirect this and just flow with things in a completely different manner. And therefore I won't have that problem anymore.
I always recommend running away. It's fucking great for avoiding problems.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. Yeah. Just don't be there in the first place, right?
Exactly. The greatest defense. I mean, this is not counting somebody who comes up being an absolute idiot.
Yeah.
In which case, finish it and then run away. Yeah. I mean, I've done martial arts for 20 years.
Yeah.
And, but really it should just be about happiness, physical comfort. Nothing more difficult to attack than somebody who's happy. And that relates to what we were just saying about the magic as well. It's as soon as you're aggressive, it gives people something to hang on to.
Well, it possibly puts you off balance then, right?
Well, everything goes to your head.
Yeah.
And what you're trying to do is not to let it go there, because that raises your center of balance as well, and you become slow when you tense.
Yeah.
So they're very interrelated in many respects, actually. Just retaining that open, clear mind rather than being pulled by your emotions all the time.
Yeah. So that's it.
And there's many ways to get there. Martial arts is one of them. Meditation works. What have you found works, Andrew, for you?
I mean, meditation. I did martial arts for a long time. Martial arts was a good road for getting over being angry to me.
Yeah.
I sort of worked through my anger there in an environment where I could sort of explore power dynamics very openly. And just returning my attention back always to like, I don't know how to put it. So there's there's that transcendent sort of samadhi kind of loss of attachment to yourself and your daily life.
Yeah.
So that piece of it combined with just very practical cultivation of self and a sustainable life, right? Like just what do I need? What do I need to do? Where am I showing up? Where do I feel I'm lacking? Why do I feel I'm lacking there? Is there something I
Yeah.
actually need? And just, kind of cycling through those different patterns of, I guess, growth orientated questions. And, it does wonders for removing unhelpful hungers and and sort of recognizing my own internal bullshit for what it is, which then
Well, there's
allows me to
nothing
show
like
up more, right?
there's nothing like a good bit of bullshit within ourselves as well. There's many things that we can pull on.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's many advantages to these things, but it's just knowing what they are is the difficulty, and not being led by them.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you'd agree that when you get past the monkey mind, as they call it here,
Yeah.
um, your relationship with time changes, your relationship with people changes. The way you can sit with people changes, the way
Yeah.
the joy of life changes,
And the way in which people receive you changes, right? Because when
completely.
you
Yeah,
when you show up and you're genuinely present with other people, they feel that,
yeah,
And if you have, if you want to call it meta, it's not really a word I would use, but but compassion or those that sort of openness to other people and seeing them for who they are without judgments or overt attachments, that's a completely different dynamic, right? That goes to a completely
completely.
different place than, when you show up and you're just like, oh my God, I so need this or that or whatever from you, right?
Well, it's also, I mean, I'm very lucky to be able to go anywhere in Thailand, literally anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, my partner's family, we were there a few months ago, and I said, "Oh, I'm going to go to Saratburi because I want to photograph this particular shrine for the book." And I said, "Where's the bus go from, the minibus?" She said, "Oh, from there." And so I got up at like 4 o'clock. I got the 5 o'clock bus. I was there by 6:30. The driver dropped me off as close as he could to the temple. 10 seconds later, a motorbike boy came up, took me to the temple. We had a quick bit of breakfast together, which I paid for, of course. It was very nice. Then I did the photographs. He waited for me. He drove me back. I jumped on the next minibus, which arrived seconds later, and I arrived back in Bangkok and went back to the family home in about 4 hours, 3.5 hours. And the response was, "How have you done that?"
Right.
How? Yeah, I said, "Well, it just kind of happens if you just connect to people." He's not the driver of a minibus. He's a man who's having to get through a day and hopefully support his family. He's not just a motorbike guy. He might be an older man who's had a very interesting life, and you treat him with some respect. And,
For sure.
you look people in the eye. You make those connections.
Yeah.
You
When
open your.
when I was in India, I wanted to go to Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened, or sorry, where the
Yeah,
Buddha first preached the Dharma, right?
yeah,
And and so I wanted to go to these places, but there's nothing there, right? They're just temples. It's just a city of temples and a few restaurants and things to support people. But
yeah.
nobody, I don't think people really live there or whatever, and there's definitely no trains or whatever. So I arrived in the nearest city, and which wasn't that far away, but there was this huge strike there that day, and
Yeah.
and I was trying to find somebody who'd be willing to take me because I was only there for a day because I left it till sort of towards the end of my trip, and I was trying to kind of hit a couple important places. And two things happened which remind me exactly of this conversation. So one was I was walking down the street, and it was a long street with a big park and government building, I think, on the other side. And it was just this huge fence that ran along this massive park all the way along. There was no easy way. There were no gates. You would have to climb it. And it was all houses on the other side, and all the houses were basically attached, and there's no roads or alleys or whatever. And I'm like mid-block, and then I hear this huge ruckus, and the people who are protesting are coming down the street, and there's just this mob of people with sticks and signs, and they're yelling and screaming and whatever. And like I look at the crowd, and I turn around and I look, and there's this gentleman standing in his door, and I just look at him, and I point at myself, and I point inside his house, and he's just like, yes, like just wave with his hands, like, yes, come in my house. And so we go in his house, he closes the door, we wait for everybody to pass. He had no English, and my Hindi is not particularly, I knew a few things like hello and thank you and whatever. And we just waited in his house and stood there and looked at each other very, very pleasantly and peacefully and whatever. And then, when it was obvious that this sound had passed and the people were gone, he opened the door and looked out, and then he gave me a pat on the back and, and sent me on my way. And then a few minutes later, I ran into this guy who was driving one of those cycle rickshaws, this really older gentleman, and I just like looked at him and I'm like, I want to go here, and he's like, sure. And so he took me, and we rode this bicycle through the countryside and stopped at a couple farms and all these amazing things. And then when we got there, on top of paying him for his time, I also bought him lunch, and we just sat there. He also had basically no English, and we just sat there eating together and looking at each other and smiling. And there's such a connection that can happen when you're open to those things. And like you say, when you're going for a purpose and when you go with a certain way, that road can just open for you, right?
It just happens. No. And it really happens because you're not thinking. Mm-hmm. And by not thinking, you're taking away the barriers that people can come, that's generally stop people relating to you.
Yeah, for sure.
I've had a remarkable period of time here, and by especially this last few years, going through the process of doing all this work, because it just happened.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It was just doors kept opening, and things kept telling me what to do next, and and then we got to the point where we managed to finish this work.
Yeah. And
yes, there were bits where it wasn't easy, but it still found a way to be done.
For sure.
And it's even my partner sometimes says, "How have you done this?" How have you done it? Well, it kind of just gave me the opportunity to do it, and then it kind of did itself.
Yeah. They meet you halfway, or more than halfway sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And also really been wanting, I've kind of resisted it for the first 20 years of coming here, because that was apparent when I first came over.
Yeah. And
it kind of waited until I was ready to kind of do it.
Yeah.
So it's been quite odd and extremely rewarding and rather wonderful.
It's fantastic. Well, I mean, maybe we've been on the phone for a long time here. Maybe we should wrap this up. But because I could talk to you all day. This is a wonderful conversation. So
it'd be nice with a cup of tea and a biscuit.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll let you know when I'm going to be in Bangkok or Thailand sometime, and we'll make that happen.
Sure.
For people who want to check out this book, and if this stuff really interests you, and you really should check out the book. It's quite an amazing work. Where do people find you, and where do people find your book?
I'm easily found in two places. One is on Facebook through the Thai Occult books page, and the easiest place to click on the book to get to timeless editions would be through the ThaiOccult.com, all one word.
Perfect.
The Thai Occult. And there's two book pictures on the front cover, one from the Sakyam book I did, and the new one on the Thai Occult. Of the two, to be honest, I'm very, very, very proud of the new one. The Sakyam book, yes, we have some superb interviews with the guys, some of the makers in there. But having just produced something really good, I'd love to go back and rewrite it.
Isn't that always the way, right? Isn't that always the
Well,
way?
to be honest with you, I don't think I'm going to do. I don't think I'll be in that position with a new one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I could have made a much better job, to be honest.
That's great.
There's always more that's going to come up, but as a broad taste, as a buffet of the Thai occult, I don't think it'll be difficult to do a better job than this, in my opinion.
Perfect. Yeah. Well, go and check it out and support Peter's work. And thanks for being on, Peter, and thanks to everybody as always for listening.
It's been lovely. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you as always for listening, folks. We've got some great interviews coming up to round out the rest of the year. And as always, every share and every support of the Patreon is deeply appreciated. It helps keep this project running, and it helps spread the word and make it accessible to everybody. And we'll see you in 2 weeks with another episode.